All right. So up on your screen, you should see a map of the United States. If you heard us talking before we started the program today, we have an exhibit here at Museum of the Rockies called Reptiles, the Beautiful and the Deadly. And it is coming to us from Allenwood, Pennsylvania. So there on the map is where the exhibit is from, and Jordy will tell you more about that in a minute. And now we are going to head over to Montana, and you'll see there we are in Bozeman, Montana, just north of Yellowstone National Park. Montana borders Canada. We're going to zoom into the Gallatin Valley here, and there you'll see our entrance to the museum. Now, those of you that live in Montana know that this green grass is a little too optimistic. We have a lot of snow on the ground this morning. It's nice and cool, but here inside the museum, it is nice and warm for our reptiles. So we are inside our exhibit. If you haven't, share in that chat box. If you're living in Bozeman or nearby Bozeman, if you've been to see this exhibit before, let us know that. But our animals are here inside the museum, even though we're temporarily closed to the public. Our zookeeper Jordy comes in every day to feed them and take care of them. This exhibit is here through September 13th. So once we reopen, we will be so excited to have you all back and join us to see these reptiles. So with that, fantastic. I'm going to turn it over to Jordy. So here at the Museum of the Rockies, when we have these live animal exhibits from Clyde Peeling's Reptiland in Pennsylvania, we welcome a zookeeper to stay with us for the duration of the exhibit. And that zookeeper here with us now is Jordy, and Jordy is going to be your presenter for the day. So thanks for joining us, Jordy.
No problem. Happy to do it. So my name is Jordy Hall. I am a zookeeper of Clyde Peeling's Reptiland. So when I'm not working on this exhibit, I'm living back in Pennsylvania and working back at Clyde Peeling's Reptiland, the zoo in Allenwood, Pennsylvania. So if you've been up at Reptiland, you probably saw the bald guy with the beard. That is me. That's my distinguishing look. But anyway, so I am the caretaker for these animals, and we have quite a few of animals on this exhibit as well. We have about 15 different species on display for you guys to check out. Some of them have multiple animals in each exhibit. Most of them have only one species in there. So we have quite a wide range of animals that you can see. I like to sort of call this a mini traveling zoo. If you were to go to Reptiland and then you were to come see our exhibit, you're going to see pretty much a lot of the same signs you would see at Reptiland, but you're also going to notice different species than what you would see at our zoo, because we have some species that are specialty for this exhibit. So we have quite a wide range of animals, and I highly recommend checking this exhibit out whenever the museum reopens. Who knows when that'll be. But in the meantime, I am caring for these animals every single day. Coming in every morning, taking care of these animals. Now, some of them need more cleaning, and sometimes I have to go in there and clean up a giant mess of, well, fecal matter and such in the exhibit. Sometimes I got to go in there and remove old skin that the animals have naturally shed. Sometimes I have to feed them. Now, being reptiles, they don't have to eat as often as we do. Sometimes they only have to eat every so often. For example, the animals I'm going to be talking about specifically today only eat about twice a week, and that is all that they need. If I were to feed them any more than that, they're going to get very, 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 very overweight. And when you are a reptile that doesn't like to be on an exercise program, it's very easy or very hard to burn off that energy. So we help kind of keep them at a nice slim weight by regulating how much they would eat, and in the wild they would be eating the same rate as well. Now later on in other shows that we're going to be doing, or presentations, like next week we're going to be talking about snakes. I'll go more in depth about their feeding schedule, but some of those snakes only eat once a month, and that's just because they're snakes. They're really adaptable at surviving. So that is a quick little summary of our exhibit. Do we have any questions so far about the exhibit?
Oh, let's see. Do you have any snakes in here, Jordy?
We do have snakes. We have about, let's see if I can remember off the top of my head how many numbers they are. We have about 5, 6 species of snake on exhibit. Some of them are itty bitty tiny little things. Some of them are very, very, very large. So definitely you'll have to check out next week to see a lot more about our snake collection. They're pretty impressive in my opinion.
One more question before we dive in. What time do you get here every day to take care of these animals?
I get in here at 9 a.m. every single day, and I'm here for about 2 or 3 hours cleaning, and that is Every single day. I do not have a day off while I'm taking care of these animals on this exhibit. I'm the only zookeeper taking care of them until my next coworker switches out with me in a month or two. We'll see when that's going to be. But that is our typical schedule for us zookeepers. We work, come in every single morning, we care for the animals, and then we go home when we're all done. And if this exhibit specifically, I'm only working maybe 2-3 hours. Some days I'm working 4 or 5 hours. It really depends on how much work these animals want to give me.
Great. I think we're ready to get started with the overview of what a reptile is.
Okay, so when we're talking about reptiles, we really got to ask the question, what even is a reptile? And when we define reptiles, there's a lot of things that people assume that makes a reptile a reptile. One of the things I hear a lot is reptiles have 4 legs, and that's not quite the case because snakes don't really have legs. I hear a lot of people say a reptile is a reptile because they have lungs. Well, we also have lungs, we also breathe air. That doesn't make us reptiles. No, instead there are 3 traits that define a reptile as being a reptile. The first one is ectothermic. So that is a big fancy word meaning cold-blooded. So there's going to be one of your terms for the day. There might be a quiz at the end. But ectothermic means they are external temperature. So it means they are cold-blooded. So we have to eat every single day, multiple times, because we are burning a ton of energy, staying a nice, warm, standard temperature all the time. Birds are like this as well. We are warm-blooded, we gotta burn a lot of energy, so we gotta eat every single day. Reptiles, on the other hand, don't need to do that because they're cold-blooded. They are relying on the temperature around them to determine how energetic they're going to be. So reptiles typically like it very warm because they want to stay more active. So if they start getting overheated, they're going to go into a nice cool pool or maybe a nice shaded place. If they start getting a little cold, they're going to go out and start basking on a nice warm rock. So cold-bloodedness is one of the first traits that makes a reptile a reptile. The next trait is oviparism, and that is another big complicated word, which means laying eggs. As you can see there with our picture of our baby wood turtles hatching right there that were back at the zoo. I'm not going to get distracted. I love talking about my wood turtles, but the point is they are oviparous, which means they all lay eggs. So a female will mate with a male, the traditional way most vertebrates do, and then they'll lay a solid egg. Now, reptile eggs are a little bit different from bird eggs, where bird eggs are very hard and solid and calcium covered and very solid, like chicken eggs. Reptile eggs are typically a little bit more softer. They're usually a little bit more leathery. Now, some of them will harden over time, become a little bit more stiff, make it more difficult to hatch. But for the most part, these animals are going to have softer, more leathery eggs that they're going to hatch from. But every single reptile hatches from an egg. Then the third trait that that's going to make a reptile is scales, as you can see there. Now, that is a picture of a juvenile Jackson's chameleon right there, and you can see all those tiny little segments on his body. Now, scales are a kind of a material made out of keratin, the same material as your fingernails. So it would be like your entire body is covered with fingernails, not hair. This gives reptiles a lot of extra protection from the different elements and from their environment. Some of these scales are actually kind of hydrophobic, meaning water will just run right off of them, meaning they don't get super soaked like we do. This is also great because reptile skin is very weird from ours, where we are designed to, well, excrete water when we get overly hot, or if we have too much water, we excrete it through sweat. Reptiles don't do that. Their skin is more adapted to absorb water than it is to excrete water. So having the scales helps make sure they don't absorb too much water and also gives them a lot of protection from their environment. So those are the 3 things that make a reptile a reptile. They are cold-blooded, they are egg-laying, and they have scales. Or, using our proper terminology, hopefully you guys remember this, ectothermic, cold-blooded, oviparism, or oviparous, meaning egg-laying, and then you have scales, which are also sometimes known as scutes. Now, what is next on my slide? So, when we're also talking about reptiles, we also have to understand their family tree, and we're going to be focusing only on one of these families or orders when we're talking about for today, we're going to focus on one of these orders. But as you can see on the picture that you're seeing, there are actually a lot of different reptiles out there. In a way, birds are technically really well adapted reptiles, but they're not cold-blooded anymore. They don't have scales truly. They instead have modified scales known as feathers. So they're not true reptiles anymore, but they are very close related. You can see how they're really close related to the animals we're going to be talking about, which are the crocodilians. You can also see that there is another group of reptile you probably have never heard of before called the tuataras. And tuataras are a very ancient group of reptile. Now, if you were to see one, you would probably think it looks like a lizard, and you're not completely wrong, but as you can see from that family tree, they are actually a different group of, or different order of reptile. They are found only in New Zealand. There's only 2 species. They are critically endangered, and they have been around since the Triassic period, which is actually before the actual lizards. So we're not really going to be talking about tuataras too much during these presentations because they are a little bit more of a specialty thing. We don't have any tuataras on this exhibit, unfortunately. And the focus of today is going to be about our crocodilians. So with that, let's talk about what a crocodile is. So order Crocodilia is a very ancient group. Now they've been around, their ancestors started showing up around the end of the Carboniferous era, around 200 million years ago. But modern day alligators and crocodiles that we think of started showing up on this planet around 95 million years ago. And they have been virtually unchanged this entire time. They've survived several extinction level events because they are super hardy and super well adapted for their environment. As you can see by this picture right here of an American alligator from, I believe this is the St. Augustine's Alligator Farm where I took this picture. American alligators are a great example for what body traits you're going to see with all crocodilians. They are all going to be semi-aquatic. So they can come out on land, they do bask in the warm sun. Some species will walk a little bit further onto land, but most of the time they're going to stay close to the water or spend a lot of time in the water. They have a giant, massive, strong, flat paddle-like tail that propels them through the water using a kind of swaying serpentine motion. The crocodilians are also typically going to have 4 legs, allow them to walk up on land and kind of bask on a nice, warm, sunny beach. You can also see that on the back of this alligator, there are all those little bumps that kind of stick out from the rest of the scales that you see, or those big bumps right there. Those are an example of a trait called osteoderms. They are bony plates inside the skin that give the alligators and crocodiles a lot of different protection. And then finally you have their big powerful head, the snappy powerful jaws. That's what we think about with alligators and crocodiles. These guys are strictly carnivorous. Mostly. Now most of the time alligators and crocodiles are going to eat any kind of meat-like animal or any kind of meat, fish, birds, lizards, turtles. They don't care. If it's made out of meat, can fit in that mouth, they're going to eat it. And they can, thanks to their super powerful jaws. Some crocodilians, like the American alligator on display, probably have a bite force of roughly 1,500 to 2,000 pounds per square inch. So that is a lot of force to crush pretty much anything. Now, I did say that mostly they are carnivorous. There is one species that is the only one documented to actually willingly eat fruit, and that is the broad-snouted caiman. Now, they are not going to strictly eat fruit, but they will eat quite a bit. Now, caiman are one of the 4 or 5 primary groups of crocodilians that we think of. Caiman are very closely related to alligators. They have very smaller bodies. They have much more broader and squatter, rounder heads. And these guys are typically going to be found in rivers and streams and such like that. And they have a voracious appetite of pretty much anything, just like of any crocodilian. Those guys right there are actually broad-snouted caiman. And like I said, those are the ones that are mostly going to want to eat meat, but in the wild have been documented to willingly eat fruit that's floating around in the water. So it's a really unique adaptation, and we're still trying to understand why they even do it. They shouldn't need to have any fruit, but that's still something scientists are studying. Another group that make up the crocodilians are the whatever the next picture, the alligators. There we go. So that handsome fellow right there is one of our is a white alligator that we had on display for a short period of time. That is the same species as the American alligator we saw on the first slide. The only difference is he has absolutely no dark pigmentation in his skin whatsoever, which gives him a very white, almost snowy kind of coloration. But alligators are very closely related to caiman. They have much more of a rounded head, but they are typically going to be larger. Alligators are also strict carnivores, and there's only 2 species of alligator in the entire world. You have the American alligator, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and you have the Chinese alligator, which is found in China, which is very unique because they have rounded, more dulled teeth that are specially adapted for eating mollusks like snails and clams and such like that. Another group of crocodilian that we have is the, if I'm right, the crocodiles. Hey, I'm right. So the crocodiles are the other group. Now, the crocodiles are also defined by head shape, and that's how it is for all of the crocodilians, is typically head shape is one of the defining traits. Crocodiles have a narrow triangular shaped snout, and this girl right here is Charlene, the Siamese crocodile. If you guys have saw our crocodilian exhibit that came here to Bozeman a couple of years ago, you probably saw Charlene. She was a great fan favorite right there. But anyway, so she is a Siamese crocodile. These guys typically are going to be a lot larger. They usually are a little bit more aggressive. And what's also really cool is we get a really good example of one of the big differences between alligators and crocodiles right here, and that is her teeth. You can see her bottom teeth are projecting over her top lip, and her top teeth are projecting over her bottom lip. That is what you're only going to see with the crocodiles, but you're not going to see that with the alligators. The alligators have a bite that actually covers their lower teeth completely. That 4th tooth that is pointing upwards on her jaw is a very clear indication that she is a crocodile. Then the final group of crocodilians are the gharials and the false gharials, also known as Tomastoa. Now, I don't have a picture about the Tomastoa or false gharials, but they look very similar to gharials, and they have very, 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 very narrow, slender snouts with very long needle-like teeth that are adapted for eating only fish. These guys only have a few species in their groups or in their orders that are with them, and they're very, very unusual compared to some of the other crocodilians. Now, unfortunately, we don't have time for me to get into everything, but they are very unique because they actually exhibit more parental care than some of the other crocodilians. Now, that is another trait that I did want to talk about briefly with the crocodilians, is they are actually really great mothers. A female alligator will build a nest, lay her eggs, and then protect that nest until the eggs hatch, and then she'll protect the babies for up to 2 or 3 years. That being said, typically the males are not great parents. Typically, the males are going to be trying to eat their babies if they see them, if they even care about them at all. So females are usually the only parent figures for the crocodilians for the first couple of years of their life. However, in gharials, it's very different. There's been documented cases of male gharials helping protect the young of their own offspring. In fact, there's even been more examples of showing 1 or 2 males protecting several different clutches of offspring, almost none of which are actually their babies. So it shows that gharials are really kind of a weirdly social species of crocodilian, and they're really, really great parents.
So we have a few questions for you, Jordy.
Okay.
We saw in one of the previous pictures that there was a hole on the side of one of these animals' heads, and we are wondering what that is. I'm going to guess it's maybe on this one.
Yeah, so what you're seeing right there is their ears. So they are capable of hearing. They hear the same, they can hear similar to what we can, but they can hear a lot more lower frequencies than what we can hear. But they do have great hearing. What you're seeing on the side of this head is just that ear. All of them have it. You also have a hole on the side of your head for your ears, only we have little fleshy bits connected to our ears to allow us to hear more in a more focused direction, where crocodilians are going to be listening to everything around them. They can pick up on sounds in the water, they can pick up sounds on the land, and that's important because crocodilians are very, very vocal. They're very closely related to birds, so they will kind of roar if they're kind of upset. They're going to kind of chirp if their baby's looking for mom. They're going to kind of hiss if they don't want a predator to get too close. There's lots of different noises that crocodilians will use to communicate with each other, so having ears is a really important trait for them to be able to, well, hear each other. Great.
And you may have said this, but is this an albino alligator that we're looking at?
It is technically an albino alligator. We prefer the term white alligator. So albino means that there's absolutely no dark pigmentation in his skin. There's a lot of different fancy terminology for these kind of things, but for the most part, yes, it is technically an albino alligator, but I rather call it a white alligator instead.
Great. We have a lot of great questions coming in, but I want to make sure we have time for everything that you have planned for us. So
Absolutely.
Let's keep moving.
Okay. Okay, so we have two species of crocodilian on this exhibit. We're going to talk about them a little bit here on this in this little chat here. The first species is the African dwarf crocodile, which you can see the lovely lady sitting behind me in the water. Now, African dwarf crocodiles are a smaller species of crocodile. There's some argument that they might be one of the smallest species of crocodilian out there. They can grow up to 5 to 6 feet long, roughly about 40 to 70 pounds heavy, and they are considered vulnerable in their environment. So they are threatened, and a lot of crocodilian species are. Partially that is because there's a lot of, negative associations that people have with crocodilians. There's also a big demand for people wanting to get their skins and their skulls and such like that. So they are threatened in their environment from people. They're also known as the bony throat crocodile, and that's really cool. So if you remember what I was talking about earlier with those osteoderms, those bony plates inside the skin, every crocodilian has them. They are located on the back of the neck, the back of the back, and the back of the tail. But with bony crocodiles, or African dwarf crocodiles, they also have osteoderms completely around their neck for just an extra level of protection. So that's one of their defining traits. They are found in Western Africa, but there is some evidence that there might be a couple of different species of dwarf crocodile, but that's not fully documented yet. Now we do have a couple of pictures of the one that we have on display here. The one we have on display here is roughly about 8 years old. She was hatched at the Philly Zoo, and she has been with Reptile for quite a few years now. She is quite an adorable little lady. She is a female. She's not going to get any bigger than this. Males do tend to get a little bit bigger than females. She is also kind of feisty at times, but sometimes she's pretty laid back. But for the most part, she wants to hang out on the land kind of basking, warming themselves up, or she likes to hang out in her water and pretend she doesn't exist, or she's just a log waiting for her next meal. Now we do have a video, hopefully you guys can see it. Now warning, this video is could potentially be a little choppy or a little frame rate-ish, but this is of me feeding the dwarf crocodile right here. You'll see that I have 2 tools in my hands. I'll talk a little bit more about those tools, but you can see I'm feeding her a piece of tilapia. In the wild, these guys are going to be eating a ton of fish. They'll also be eating things like frogs, salamanders. They'll even enjoy mollusks like snails and stuff like that as well.
Why do they have long mouths, Jordy?
They have long mouths because it's just an ancient trait that they have, but there's a lot of evidence to show that having those really long jaws, it allows them to have a very long, powerful bite force, and having very long jaws to be able to hold on to prey really, really well.
Great. Okay. Ready for the next one?
I'm ready for the next one.
Whoop. That's just
the same
playing
video.
It again.
Look at that handsome guy. So the other species that we have on display here is a juvenile American alligator that is roughly about 2 years old per se. American alligators are native to the United States, but only found in the southern parts of the United States. You can find them as far north as North Carolina, and you can find them as widespread as Texas. Though, of course, we're all very familiar with them being located in Florida. They can grow to be 9 to 13 feet long, 200 to 600 pounds, and live anywhere between 60 and 80 years old. They also have incredibly strong bite forces when they are full grown, which, like I said earlier, can have a bite force of almost 2,000 pounds per square inch. That's what allows them to pretty much eat whatever the heck they want. They like to eat turtles. They like to eat fish, birds, lizards, smaller crocodilians like alligators sometimes. They love to eat a wide range of things. They will sometimes enjoy larger prey like deer, and they're not going to be eating these prey whole. Now, these animals don't exactly chew their food. They will swallow larger chunks, but they do have to rip off smaller chunks from their prey. And they're able to do that with a technique called the death roll. They will grab onto their prey and spin their bodies rapidly in the water, ripping off larger chunks, allowing them to rip off smaller, manageable pieces that allow them to swallow a good chunk. These guys are considered least concern because if you've been to Florida, more than likely you've seen a ton of alligators. They're almost to a nuisance level, which is perfectly okay because they're native to Florida, and they're a great example of a conservation success story. So American alligators back around the early 1900s, late 1800s, these guys were almost extinct. Their populations were incredibly, incredibly low. They were being hunted for their meat. They were being hunted for souvenirs for tourists. They were being hunted for their skins, for their skulls, for all sorts of different things. And there was a lot of pressure on the wild populations that they were being hunted to the extreme. Now, luckily, people started noticing that they weren't finding any big crocodilians or any big alligators in the wild, so they started putting a lot of protections on them. They started limiting how many you could hunt and when you could hunt. They started incentivizing alligator farms, which may sound weird, but alligator farms are not too much different from typical farms like we would do for cows and chickens and pigs. Alligator farms are where we can raise crocodilians like alligators in a very humane environment, feed them, give them wonderful lives, and then humanely euthanize them to be able to meet the demand that people have for the meats, for the skins, for the skulls, without affecting the wild populations. Because of these, the population went from critically endangered to least concern. So it's a great example of how conservation can work. Now, the one that we have on display here, we do have a couple of pictures of. Now, he is a very feisty little guy. Now, truly, we don't actually know the gender of our alligator yet. We haven't really sexed him because at this size, you really can't tell the difference between them. Once they get about full-grown size, you start noticing that the females are smaller and the males are significantly larger. At this age, we don't really know. We haven't really, checked because there's really hard to sex an alligator without being very invasive. We don't want to ruin his privacy. So I like to consider him a male, but he could be a female just as well. That is perfectly all right. He loves to bask on a nice, warm, sunny area, and he is also incredibly, incredibly feisty. He loves to eat pretty much whenever I'm going to be going into that exhibit and always expects food. We do have a video of our American alligator eating. Now, what you're going to see in this video, as I'm trying to get him in the right position, again, the video might be a little choppy on your guys' end, but what you're going to see is that the alligator starts out on the land. I never ever want to feed my crocodilians on the land because I don't want them to make a connection between, hey, if I stand on the land and beg for my food, I'll get food. I want to feed them in the water. It's going to be a lot safer for me and a lot easier for the alligator. You'll also notice that I'm trying to only feed them right there at that big orange rock. That is what I call stationing, or what is properly called stationing. I want to feed my crocodilians at one particular spot, so whenever they're hungry, they go and wait for me at that spot. In that case, that's a big rock in his exhibit. It's a perfect spot for me to try to focus his energy to feeding right there. I try to do the same thing with our dwarf crocodile as well, trying to feed her right here at this big tree right here. Oh, hey, she came out.
She did.
She's
come
saying
out.
hello. There's a lot of different techniques I'll use when I am taking care of my crocodilians. Now, this baby alligator is barely over a foot long, and his bite is not going to do any damage. But I don't want to be bitten because it still hurts a whole heck of a lot. So I have to be really safe. So whenever I'm feeding these animals, I don't just use my bare hands to kind of dangle the food in front of them. I always use special tools like tongs that will kind of extend them into the water. That way I keep my fingers away from the chompy bits. Another thing that I will be doing when I'm taking care of these guys, especially when I'm going in with our bigger crocodilians like this lady right here, I'll have a different tool, which is very complicated, but it is pretty much a giant stick. That is it. This is my force field that allows me to keep my distance from this crocodilian. I will keep it in between me because if she's going to suddenly lunge at me instead of the food, she'll hit this stick before she hits my leg. So it's a big safety element. I'll also use this to sort of give her tactile communication. Maybe I will tap her on the back of the legs to ask her to go into the water. Maybe I'll even tap her on the nose in order to ask her to back up, or maybe to open her mouth. There's a lot of different ways I can use this tool. Now, as you saw in those other videos, I really only use these kind of as extra protection, and I will always use my long tongs in order to feed them. Now, if we are ready, unless we have a bunch of questions first.
We have a lot of questions, but I think they will really enjoy what you have planned next
Okay.
time. So I was just going to zoom in.
So what we're going to try to do is here, live on the stream, we're going to try to feed this lovely lady. Now, that being said, This is a live animal. She is a wild animal. She is not a pet. She is not domesticated. She does not view me as her best friend. Instead, she views me as a giant source for food. So if she's getting a little too feisty, if she's not in the mood, I'm not going to feed her. But hopefully I can get her to eat right here in front of this tree. Hopefully you guys get a good shot of that. But again, I cannot guarantee anything, but let's see what happens. So I'm going to go in there and try to feed her right now.
Sounds good, Jordy. All right. Jordy is going to go in on the back side of her cage. It's out of view from us. And you can see her. She can hear Jordy coming in.
Good girl.
Nice. I hope y'all saw that. That was great, Jordy. Fantastic. Yeah, she does look a little fake sometimes, especially when she's sitting there nice and quiet, kind of taking a nap with her mouth open.
Yep.
She can look pretty fake.
But that's what they want you to think. Even in the wild, they're going to have that same strategy. They're going to pretend to float in the water and pretend to be a log, so that way birds and other animals ignore them, and then they get too close, and then they get a free meal. There's actually been some recent cases of American alligators using sticks and putting them on top of themselves to make themselves look even more like a log. They'll also just pretend to stay really, 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 really still on land, because sometimes with animals like this that are a little bit smaller, there are still predators that will want to hunt them. So when they're on land, they pretend not to exist. They pretend to be rocks and logs, and if a predator gets too close, they dart right into the water. And they are wicked fast in the water to get away from a lot of predators. They can swim up to 20 miles per hour, which is great because as we looked up just recently, the fastest record goes to Michael Phelps for human swimming in the water, which is only 6 miles per hour. So even if you were trying to outrun a crocodilian, you're probably not gonna. So don't try to outrun a crocodile in the water. If you see a crocodilian in the wild, all you got to do is just back up and leave them alone. Most crocodilians are going to be more scared of you than you are of them. So if you see a crocodile in the wild or an alligator in the wild, just back up, leave it alone, give it its space, and you guys will be just fine.
We have so many great questions, but we only have time for about 2 because we only have about 3 minutes left, everybody. This is a great question. Are alligators and crocodiles predators? If they are, why do they have their eyes on the side? Don't predators usually have their eyes in front?
That is an excellent, excellent question. They are predators. They're exclusive predators. Now, they do have their eyes more on the side, and that's a trait that you see a lot with reptiles, but their eyes are a little bit more focused towards the front of their face. They can see a wide range compared to other predators, and that is really useful when you're an animal that floats in the water and just kind of waits for food to come nearby. So he is always on the alert, watching for other animals. They are also, quite a few of them are prey for a lot of different species as well. So even having that wide range allows them to watch for threats that might be getting too close. For example, smaller American alligators might want to run away from bigger American alligators. So that is a great, great question.
Why are their toes webbed, Jordy?
Their toes are webbed because it allows them to swim. Now, not all of their toes are going to be webbed. The front feet don't really have any kind of webbing. Their back legs do, but they're not really going to be doggy paddling in the water. They're going to be relying on their legs. So they do have webbed toes. It does allow them to swim a little bit better, but they don't utilize it as much as other aquatic species.
Great. And last question, because we can fit it in. If you keep it short, how long do alligators and crocodiles live?
Depends on the species. So most of them are going to be living between 60 and 80 years old. There are some supposed rumors that some might be able to live to be up to 100. Some other of the smaller species might only live to be about maybe 50 or 60 years old. So it really depends on the species.
Great. And the dwarf croc is the biggest one we have here at the Museum of the Rockies.
Yes.
Do you have other species back in Pennsylvania?
We do have several species back at the zoo. We have a juvenile saltwater crocodile on display, and saltwater crocodiles are the largest crocodilians on the planet. But our biggest guys are our two full-grown American alligators, Rocky and Adrian. Rocky is about 11 feet long, and Adrian is about 9 feet long, and they live in a giant enclosure and get a lot of tasty meals.
Great. Well, with that, we're going to zoom back out here. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining us today. From Museum of the Rockies, we have 2 upcoming programs with Jordy. Today, we talked about crocodiles and alligators, but there's many more reptiles inside this exhibit here at MOR. So next week, I know a lot of you had questions about snakes. Next week at the same time, we're going to be talking about snakes with Jordy as well. So that's next Thursday at 12:10. You'll see it on museumoftherockies.org. You could visit our partners at Streamable Learning for their full lineup of programs. And thank you all so much for your great questions. I hope you have a wonderful day. For more resources or to see this video after we've got it ready, you can go to museumoftherockies.org/learn. So a big thank you to all of you for joining us, and a big thank you to our partners at Streamable Learning. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will see you next week with Jordy.